I'll start the podcast show by saying thank you to David Morgan we have as our guest here. It's great to have you on the show, and my listeners' promise is that we're going to hear how a leader with experience across aerospace, automotive, manufacturing, MRO, and healthcare has built operational control in very different environments, and what those cross-sector moves teach us about supply chain, operations, and leadership. And they should be able to come away with a clearer sense of how good leaders create structure, capability, and resilience when systems are immature or complexity is high. So, thanks again for joining us today,
It's a
Dave.
pleasure.
Hopefully I've got a bit of a structure to the podcast with a sort of three-part running order where we'll look first section covering career path and cross-sector perspective, building functions and operational control, and then finishing up with leadership lessons learned across these complex environments that you've worked in. So hopefully, if you can remember back to starting out, starting with that career path perspective. I remember when we first met and had a chat, you described to me, and I didn't mention at the time, I fell into supply chain as well. How did you fall into supply chain? I think it was by accident as a data-driven graduate that you were. And how did that come about, and what did it look like on the ground?
Exactly that. It was a complete accident. I graduated University of Liverpool studying computer science. I was in banking at that time, and I just knew I didn't want to continue in banking. And fortunately, a family friend was working for a white goods company who were importing products over from Asia, and he thought that there was some mileage in my background and my skill set, or he hoped there was, from university, and bringing that into the business. I think it's fair to say he took a bit of a punt at the time and created a role that didn't exist, and was hopeful that it could turn into something and flourish into something. So I've got to look back and thank him for the start all those years ago. And yeah, it was a complete accident, and I think a lot of people's journeys are similar in the fields that they fall into, and I'm glad to say that it was a happy accident.
Definitely so. And well, I'll give him a pat on the back as well for having that foresight and seeing that, hey, this could work, and taking the punt, and it did work out. So was that Stoves?
It was two directors that worked for Stoves who created a company and went alone. So they thought that they could create a variation of a theme and import a lot of the material from the Asian market, rebrand it as their own, and then go direct to some of the bigger resellers like your Currys and your Argos. And they were quite successful to begin with. They tapped into a market that was unsaturated, and they were able to gain some success. And if I come back to the role and what I brought, not analytics wasn't new at that time. It's not, we're still talking 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. That makes me feel old. It wasn't a new concept. It wasn't a new theme, but I think that the trust or the validation that analytics was given back then wasn't the same as it is now. So probably trying to convince a hierarchy within a business to take a punt on this role would have been difficult 20 years ago, where today it's your bread and butter. It's the value that gives is now unheralded, and a lot of people understand that. So it's more I think the convincing of the hierarchy to make that role from when it didn't exist is the magic that happened way back when.
Reminiscing, looking back, what were the biggest lessons from building something that previously didn't exist? I mean, you may not have realized it at the time. I'm sure later on in your career, but at the time, what do you think the biggest lessons were?
I think focusing on data and on fact, and that was I couldn't come in and rewrite the processes and try and go too far away from the norm. But what I could do was use the skill set that I did have to look at what they were doing and bring the analytical data analysis into the everyday. So there were a couple of things that kind of resonated with me that early on, and that was the planning and the forecasting. So you could look at the historical forecasting, you could look at the forecast accuracy, you could look at the forecast bias, and I could use that as a way to show firstly how inefficient and inaccurate we were, and how the data and the analytics could improve that moving forward. And to supplement that, the inventory policy based on actual sales, based on seasonal sales and history. And I wanted to hone in on that to begin with, to almost prove concept. And then that gave me the ability then to get the buy-in from the other stakeholders. So at the start, just leading with the forecasting and planning and the inventory profile to support the sales, had the finance team, the sales team, the engineering team, had them all working and bought into what I wanted to do. And that gave me the traction then to try and build some other systems and some other techniques that were a little more nuanced and a little
Yeah.
new to them, but basing it on history, basing it on fact,
Uh,
allowed me to get a
yeah.
foothold.
Yeah. A great way to start it. Yeah. The numbers don't lie. Okay, you can make statistics look in a way, but the facts and the figures and the data that you're presenting, to help, it helps paint the picture, doesn't it? And if you can articulate that as well. And what strikes me there, Dave, is that even at that start, even at the start of your career there, you were building the networks that the business relies on. It was a systems approach
Yeah,
that you were embarking upon.
exactly that. And I didn't know it at the time. I know it now looking back, but
Yeah,
it was the building blocks for S&OP 20
yeah,
years ago.
yeah,
And as I say, it's when you look back with what you've done over the years and where you started and how you've developed, you don't realize what you were actually doing at the time that you were doing it.
yeah,
It was S&OP before S&OP
yeah.
was a thing.
Yeah, yeah. I found myself in that position really similarly, and hopefully we can maybe come on to at that point later in the piece, because I think
Definitely.
that
Yeah.
there's so much value in understanding what a good S&OP or SIOP process looks like. Um, so just to wrap up on sort of career path and that cross sector perspective, um, you've worked across healthcare, consumer goods, aerospace, automotive, and advanced manufacturing. What a great range there. What has that journey taught you about supply chain operations and or supply chain and operations leadership?
Yeah. So I think regardless of the product, the market, the industry, or the size of a business, it's taught me that supply chain is pivotal to success in every single facet of business moving forward. Without a solid supply chain, you're effectively building on sand. And there's quite a lot of the fundamental building blocks within that don't change. It doesn't matter whether you're making a car, a plane, whether you're working in healthcare, the fundamentals within that supply chain structure are all the same. And that's the key thing that stuck with me over the years, in that if you get your supply chain right to begin with, you can create quite an agile business. You can create a business that can pivot depending on how the market moves or how big the business becomes, or if you need to suddenly downturn for whatever reason, then the supply chain is able to do that. If you don't give the supply chain the respect that it deserves, and you try and, for want of a better term, um, play at it, then you will
Yeah,
come unstuck in
yeah.
no matter which walk of life it is, no matter which industry it is, you will come unstuck pretty quickly.
Yeah, a strong believer myself, having spent 20 years. I feel even older, 30 years. I'm in my 30th year now. since falling into manufacturing. So, yeah, understanding that supply chain control being paramount. Um, in your roles at Haas Group, BAE Systems, and IAC Group, what did those environments teach you around operational control, and maybe how supply chain fits in with that?
Very good question. So they all operated very differently, some quite independently, some quite closely with supply chain, but they all focused on the same problems at different times. They all came back to the same fundamental concerns and issues, in that if the operation and the supply chain weren't as one, then there's that famous meme, isn't there, of people doing that and pointing the other way. And and you get that really quickly with supply chain operations, manufacturing, that unless you are all singing from the same hymn sheet, then you may as well be sat in different buildings in different towns in different cities, because you're ultimately pulling in the wrong direction. And the operational control has to come from supply chain. It has to be the I, I think I mentioned it when we first spoke. They act as almost the quarterback, as a sports
Yeah,
metaphor,
really
and
good analogy. Yeah,
they see the whole picture. They understand the strategy and what strategy needs to be delivered, and then they go and ensure execution of that strategy through the various teams, and that operational control has to be understood by all. It has to be agreed by all, and it has to be with everybody's involvement. Otherwise, it will come unstuck so quickly.
it's great to hear you position it. This is exactly how I feel about the profession, as you say, quarterback view of the whole field, and that's the level it needs to be at. It needs to have
Yeah.
that regard and that position at the table. Yeah, really, really well put. Um, how different is it leading supply chain then from an MRO to an aerospace context to an automotive or an industrial? Then you have a great vantage point having experience across these different sectors.
Yeah, mainly the pace. The pace is quite different in each of the sectors, and the with the pace comes the resilience, comes the pressure, comes the agility and the problem solving. Now that it's not really a different skill set. It's just the ability to use that skill set at a different pace. And you'll speak to, I'm sure, an awful lot of people, and people who've not been in automotive will talk about it. But if you've not been in it and you've not lived it, it's really difficult to compare it to anything else. You've got a vehicle coming off the line every minute and a half, and if you stop that line or there's a delay, then depending on what the car type it is, there's potentially a 60k sale that you're impacting every 60 to 90 seconds.
Yeah,
So that pressure and that pace, it's not like anything else. And aerospace is the complete contradiction of that. At BAE Systems, there was a jet that was made every 6 months to 9 months. Not every 60 to 90 seconds. So there's quite a lot of ability to recover when there's an issue, when there's a problem. You don't have that in automotive. You don't have that in the MRO sector either. There's an aeroplane on the ground that's waiting to get some kind of overhaul for it to go back out. So MRO and automotive, quite similar. Aerospace manufacturing is just a different world, really
it's a
different world.
yeah, it's a different world. We've still the supply chains to manage. Maybe we're looking in slightly different areas of focus, but still the context is the same, isn't it? Um,
Very much so. Yeah.
and I think we've spoke previously about there is a buzz to that constancy of pressure in some sectors in really that 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 high volume of turnover and that high pressure environment, and it can be a bug, can't it, to be a part of that?
It can, and it's almost. It must feel like the nicotine hit, or the buzz that you get from the a gambling high or something along that. That's
Yeah,
the only way that I can kind of describe it. It almost becomes, you want the day not go the way you planned it, because you get the fire to put out, or you've got
Yeah,
more plates to spin, and you need to go and find a product from a different supplier or a different market, or you need to solve a problem that you didn't know was coming, and it's caught you completely
yeah.
off guard. And that can be really, really addictive.
There's an
And
adrenaline there. Yeah,
so much so.
it gets the chemicals flowing so that you can, yeah, so that we can react and make a difference. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So when you move into a new business, what are those first signs that an operation is under control or maybe not under control? And to that end, a supply chain being under control or not in control.
Visibility more than anything else. I think in the modern world of lean manufacturing, you should be able to walk onto a shop floor. You should be able to walk into an office environment, whichever department or function that is, and you should be able to see really quickly where they are and how they're performing. And the same can be said about supply chain. Can you understand, by walking into a supply chain office, where they are with inventory and stock that's at risk, where they are with procurement or past due deliveries and orders, where their plan is against performance? And that visual tells me they're under control,
Yeah.
and the actions that come from that tells me that they've got a great handle on what they need to do. So it's fine to say something is red, and there's a metric on that board that tells me that there's something wrong. But an under control business will have next to it what the action is, who owns it, and when. I've
When,
just been
yeah.
working with a really detailed and fantastic lean coach that we brought into the business, and he's got a saying: who, by, when. And it's really simple, but it's who owns it, who's going to fix it, and by when. When is it going to be resolved? Because if you don't know who, by, when, then you aren't solving the problem.
Yeah, yeah,
So that
yeah.
real clear visual and that real clear indication of where I am, what's happening day to day, what my performance is, and what the corrective action is, that tells me that the operation is under control.
Absolutely, well said. And there's a great takeaway there for the listeners and viewers. Go make sure you can. There's got to be an owner, and there's got to be an owner and a timeline, and otherwise it's just open ended, isn't it?
Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Dave. What are the common weak points you tend to see across people, process, systems around planning, supplier management, those sort of areas?
Around planning, probably the holistic view with other functions, and that is making sure that you've got the regular cadence in with the manufacturing team, with the maintenance team, with the sales team. It's fine to have a cross-functional S&OP or whatever you want to call it. You probably have, and other businesses will have their monthly cadence of when they're looking at what the performance was for the last month, what the plan was, how that was executed. But where's the regular cadence to go and speak to all of those different departments that influence it? So maintenance might be telling us that we're taking a piece of kit down that wasn't planned, and if we know it in advance, even if it's a day, a couple of days, a week, we can do something about it and we can do something different. Sales might all of a sudden have some news within the last 48 hours they didn't the last time we meet. Manufacturing may be able to tell us that they've got sickness absence, that they've got another shift that is able to be put on to bring something back. They don't need to be long sessions, but they need to be regular cadence
Got to have the
sessions.
cadence to it, and everybody getting your ducks in a row, aren't you? People know when it's going to
Exactly that.
happen. They know we define what information we need to bring along, and
Yeah.
when the team, yeah, I agree entirely. When the teams understand, when they can see the outputs, and we start to de-risk situations, it's just win-win, isn't it? But again, you're talking
Yeah.
about people coming together, talk and being at one, and not silo working, isn't it? It is about
Uh,
coming together.
and plans are just that. They are a plan, and they often are not worth the paper they're written on half an hour after they've been put together. The good businesses and the good teams are those that regularly come back at the individual then sessions, as I say, through those functions. It doesn't need to be hours and hours. It doesn't need to be in depth, but it does need to be that regular touch point, that regular cadence. Otherwise, it falls apart.
Yeah. And just to wrap up on the sort of building functions and this the operational control section we've been on, um, how, how do you think about balancing the short-term firefighting, that day-to-day piece, with building a stronger medium to long-term capabilities?
It's an excellent question because there's a fine balance between the two. And again, I'll touch on something that I mentioned when we first spoke. There is some satisfaction in I call it hero mode, and that is where everybody understands the problem, and we've got people that are going above and beyond, staying late, doing something out of the ordinary. They're putting their cape on, the superhero cape,
Yeah,
and they're solving a problem. That's great and it's fantastic, but it's not sustainable. And if you always live in that mode, you never get out of it, and you're always working on the short term, and you're never then looking at the next. What does 6 months outlook look like? What does 12 months out look like? And you never ever get into the 5-year plan. So I think it's every now and again you need to realize where you are, and you've got to say, okay, we're in this firefighting mode. We're not going to do any different if we carry on the way that we are. Sometimes you've got to let a plate or two drop to actually stop it from needing to be spun moving forward. You've got to stop the madness, to stop the bleeding, to then move forward and have the ability to go and fix those problems long term, and get away from the weeds and the here and the now to look at more of the long term.
yeah. Get your head up above the parapet and understand that there's going to be something beyond this. Otherwise, you're forever in the trenches, aren't you? Yeah.
That's it.
Good
Yeah.
point. Thank you. And in the final section, then, I'd like to consider that what you can bring from your leadership lessons across these complex environments. And maybe one of the stories that you shared with me was helping to set up, was it the one of the Brazilian sites out in Brazil for JLR support out of Rio with the KD flows.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll ask, what were the big challenges in building that supply chain, and what did you learn from it?
So uh, KD or CKD is knockdown manufacturing or
Yeah,
component knockdown, and it's where you're sending out part
big
assembled
kit.
goods,
Yeah,
part assembled or kit out for final assembly at location. And we set up a function out in Brazil for IAC Brazil to support JLR Brazil. The biggest issues that we faced to begin with were customs concerns. So sending out to a new location, we were in the red channel to begin with, which meant that one of every probably 3 or 4 shipments were held, were
wow.
inspected fully, took weeks to release, and you only move away from that with time. The more shipments that go without issue on paperwork or concern on goods, the more and more you work through that, you come into the amber channel, the green channel. So to start with, it was nothing that we could do other than time was the healer, and
Yeah,
that was a concern. To get over that, we were chartering planes, we were sending people over with hand carries, and they were turning up at, um, at borders with suitcases of car parts rather
and
than
this,
clothes for the beach.
yeah, this is exactly, we touched upon it earlier, didn't we? This is the level of something's coming off the end of a production line, and you've got a person there waiting in a suitcase on the next flight out of Heathrow, wherever, and literally with the luggage to that's the cut and thrust, isn't it? At times,
It is, but particularly automotive, it very much is. It all you mentioned it before, the buzz that you get from it. It almost becomes a game, and the game is that we will not be the ones who stop that production
yeah,
line. Somebody else can, but it will not be us. It will
feels,
be
yeah,
another supplier. And we've just got to make sure that we do everything that we can to make sure that we always keep ourselves ahead of the slowest bear in the woods. And it's a really strange position to find yourself. And it's a really strange outlook to have. And that comes, I think, with a bit of pressure from the OEMs onto the supply base, but it almost becomes the name of the game as you're trying to keep those production lines and those parts coming off.
yeah, yeah. Great points, and again, as you said, that supply chain piece. It's understanding that. it's understanding that process and where those barriers are going to be and where the risks are going to be. And for some people, I suppose, yeah, finding out you're in a red channel and you've not been able to forecast that your kit, your material flow is going to be sat somewhere for 2 weeks, and there is not one thing you can do about it.
Yeah.
There is not one thing you can do about it. That can be a bit of a big letdown.
It can. All of a sudden your ocean freight turns into urgent air freight, your
Yeah,
costs start to spiral. But again, you make sure that you keep those cars coming off the production
yeah.
line, and you take your lessons from what's
Take your
happened,
lessons. Yeah,
and then you
exactly.
start to mitigate that risk moving forward with the lessons learned.
Well, that's a really great segue there to my next question, Dave. What lessons transfer well across sectors, and what has uh, maybe that's an easy one to answer. My next point, which is what has to be relearned each time.
So problem solving is a fantastic tool, and there's not enough problem solving within businesses, or there certainly is to a level, and then it kind of stops. So it's, if you looked at your whether you work through an 8D or a
Yeah,
5Y or your
yeah. Start with a 5Y. Yeah,
PDCA, you get to a certain level and you think you've cracked it, but 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 completing that task and that delivery allows you to learn fully from the mistakes and then stop it from happening again. The thing that I took from the different sectors and the relearning was the problem solving, or the lessons learned were completely different in aerospace, in automotive, in healthcare, and different manufacturing within. In that, automotive was to containment as quick as you can. How do you get me a safe sequence? How do you get me from making sure that the next car on the line has not got the problem?
yeah.
And they focus more on the containment. If I look at aerospace was, how do we stop that from ever happening again? What's the root cause? What's the root cause fix? How do we remove that completely and mitigate that risk? So they went beyond containment and move. Their focus was on removal and corrective action. So the problem solving element was the I think the biggest issue that I've had to relearn, or to realign with
Realign.
which
Yeah, yeah.
business I was working in, whether it was containment and trying to ensure that we stopped as quickly as we could, or it was the other opposite end and it was okay, we've contained, but I want to know as quickly as we can what stops us being here again. Automotive and aerospace were very, very different ends of that equation.
Well, yeah, and uh, yeah, great life lessons there from the reality. Yeah, really well put. That it's not all the same, is it? The problem solving isn't all the same. There's a different focus area, and it's understanding that, isn't it? And
Yeah.
being able to adapt. Yeah, great points. Um, and the last couple of few questions then. For leaders trying to step from supply chain into broader operations and manufacturing roles, um, what capabilities matter the most?
Ooh. I'm trying to look back at the teams that I've worked in and around, and who've been more successful, who've been more effective.
Yeah, I almost feel that it's easier if you've been in a really good supply chain environment. And I look back to you building it and being part of it and being part of that system and network. It's sort of easier because you've worked end to end and brought all those different functions together. Whereas if you come in the other way, I don't think that happens so much. Maybe.
No, I agree, and one of the things that we touched on when we first spoke was, I'd stolen this phrase from somebody else, but the 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 operation is the engine, and supply chain is the oil that lubricates that engine. And what I think I mean by that is the supply chain can run without manufacturing. Manufacturing cannot run without supply chain. And the successful leaders that I've worked with, and the ones that have been more effective, have had a well-rounded background, or at least been involved with supply chain, because they understand the impact that it has. They understand that it's not moving boxes. They understand that everything supply chain does, whether it's planning, procurement, whether it's warehousing, logistics, all of that has an impact on how a product moves through its life cycle and starts from process one to being end of a line and ready to ship to a customer. So all of the having the part at the right place at the right time, having the Kanban system in place, having the correct inventory in the correct location, and somebody being able to pick it, having the correct logistics set up in there, all of that will stop you delivering to a customer. All of that will hurt you. And the most effective leaders, I think, understand that
Yeah.
more than understand it, have been in that environment and
Yeah.
seen that environment that, it's criminal to fail to deliver to a customer.
Yeah.
It's almost suicidal if that is for a nut, a bolt, a washer, or cardboard for packaging. And it feels almost like we've made this really complex product, an item, and it's been through X amount of weeks of lead time and life cycle to get to where it needs to get to. And then we can't ship it because we've not got the storage media that it's
Yeah.
shipped on.
Yeah.
So the real successful companies and the real successful leaders have got that variation of background within the different functions, particularly supply chain.
Really well said, Dave. I agree entirely. There's such complexity that's upstream to bring everything together, and then to handle the downstream after operations. So many functions, so many people, so many reliances. The global, um, the global systems that we rely on. There's just such complexity, isn't there? And I agree entirely. Those leaders who understand that complexity, I believe, are better positioned. Um, so yeah, thanks for that. And how how would you say your supply chain background, or we have touched upon it, um, helps you, has shaped how you now lead manufacturing operations, and maybe around pace, resilience, and what great operations look like?
I think from a resilience point of view, if you've always worked in one function, it's always easy to almost not point the finger, but not have the soft ears when there's a concern or there's an issue, and it's easier to glance in other directions to say, okay, well, this failed because we didn't have a good forecast from sales, or this failed because we we didn't get the feedback from manufacturing. And it's so easy for those functions to do the same thing with supply chain as well. We didn't send that order out to a customer because we didn't have our bits. We didn't send that out because the plan was wrong before we started. So I think the ability to then go from one area to another, you understand what the outlook is on manufacturing from supply chain. You understand what the outlook is on supply chain from manufacturing, and you can start to bridge those gaps, and you can start to heal those relationships where they need to be
Yes.
healed. And you can start to link the people that need to be linked, because quite often those people are sat within the business, but they're siloed. And we've got the production scheduler sat over here, and we've got the planner sat over here, and they aren't talking, and they're both doing what they believe is the best job for the business. But if they just sat down and understood what the
Yeah.
impact of each other's
Others,
role was
yeah,
on each other,
yeah.
then they would be able to deliver twice as much value with probably half the effort. So it's putting the 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 teams together. It's putting the aces in places effectively, and putting
Yeah.
all of the skill sets that need to be linked together with each other, and trying to mediate between as well. I think that's one of the best things. Mediate might be too strong a term, but almost to link the issues and concerns they've got and make everybody aware of what pain other people have got and how what we do impacts on that.
Excellent and well put. That's it. The great leaders get the best out of get the best out of their assets, and sometimes it's putting those assets together and making them more efficient and taking that silo working away. Yeah, great, great answers there. Thank you so much, Dave. Um, my last question, um, is there one principle that stayed true across all those different environments? If there is one, what would it be?
If to one principle,
Or is the one we touched upon the S&OP earlier? Is the one, if a business hasn't got it or it's not working well, is the
yeah,
one tool that you'd really get the team focused around?
yeah. I mean, we touched on S&OP or SIOP. Look, companies call it a lot of different things and transact it in a lot of different ways. But ultimately, it's data, and it's data to drive decision and to influence strategy and decision making. And if you don't have that, then you may be able to be successful for a really short space of time, but you'll never ever flourish. And the reason that is, it gives you the ability to take emotion out, and having that S&OP process, which is, or whatever you want to call it in whatever business people work within. If you've got that cross-functional input, if you've got that honest and open environment where you can retrospectively look back and say, okay, last month we all agreed on this. This is how we performed. If it didn't go the way we wanted to, you've got to be able to hold that post-mortem openly and honestly with data. And if you don't have that process, then you are a really emotive business, and you are almost shooting from the hip and changing your strategy and changing your delivery, weekly, monthly, even daily. If you are that emotive with your decision making. S&OP or supply chain data removes that. It
Yeah,
removes that requirement to have to be as reactive, because if your data is sound and your strategy that you've all agreed on from that is aligned with where your data is driving you to go to, it may have been that there's been a blip, a force majeure, a bump in the road that meant that you didn't quite hit it in month one, or further down the line, month 3, month 4. That doesn't mean that you need to go and change your strategy. It might just mean that your strategy may take a little longer to bed in or to start delivering, and your S&OP will prove that. And it will not only prove it, it will give everybody the confidence that it was the right track a month ago. It's still the right track now. It will deliver to us, and this is the way forward that we should go. So yeah, look, whatever you want to call it, S&OP, your sales and operations review, your post-mortem,
yeah,
a lot of companies call them different things, but ultimately it's how you use the data that you've got around you to drive the strategy moving forward, and then looking at your execution of that as you go through. And if your data's right, your strategy's correct, and your execution delivers, you're on the right track, and your business will flourish over time.
brilliant. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Dave. And hey, we started out with data. You're a data analyst. You fell into this. We finished up with that main principle, and I agree wholeheartedly. Data-driven decision making and the quality of that data is so key. Dave, thanks so much for joining us on the Inside the Chain podcast show. It's
Absolute
been
pleasure.
it's been a real pleasure, and hopefully a lot of takeaways for watchers and listeners. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always good to talk shop, and hopefully there's some elements that people can take out of it that will help.
Always cheers, Dave.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.